You don't find truth by adding more to yourself. You find it by removing what doesn't belong. We begin today not with answers, but with a question. Why do we seek altered states? Many who walk the path of spiritual development encounter a companion along the way, cannabis. For some, it opens doors. For others, it closes them just as fast. Let us be honest. Weed can relax the body, quiet the mind, and slow the rhythm of a chaotic world. In those moments of stillness, people often say, I feel more connected. I feel more aware. But is that true awareness, or just a quieter noise? Spirituality, at its core, is not an escape. It is not a high. It is the unshaking presence you carry when there is no crutch, no distraction, and no altered chemical state. True spirituality is sober, not just in body, but in perception. Weed can give you a glimpse, like a window to the sky. But a glimpse is not a path. A moment of clarity is not mastery. And if you need it every time to feel peace, then you are no longer free. The ancient teachers always pointed inward. Breath, posture, focus, discipline, these were the tools. Not smoke, not dependence. Nature gives us medicine, but medicine becomes poison when we cannot put it down. So if you seek truth, sit in silence. If you seek light, face the dark. If you seek peace, learn to be still without needing anything. Let cannabis teach you once, but do not let it become your teacher forever, because the real teacher is not in the leaf. The real teacher is your own awareness, undisturbed, unenhanced, and unafraid. This is not judgment. This is clarity. This is not against. This is beyond, and that is the end of the discussion. There is a subtle yet profound difference between what is clear and what is real. Many people turn to cannabis seeking a sense of clarity, a mental space that feels still, where thoughts slow down and emotions soften. In that moment, the constant noise of modern life fades into the background. It may feel like a spiritual experience. But clarity achieved through external means is always conditional. It depends on the presence of the substance, and anything that depends cannot be the ultimate. What cannabis does well is this: it interrupts the usual patterns. For a while, the restless mental loops, the planning, the anxiety, the self-judgment may fall silent. And in that silence, a person may touch something deeper, a feeling of oneness, a heightened perception, a spaciousness that is rare in everyday life. This experience is real, yes, but is it awakening? That depends entirely on what happens after the high fades. True spiritual awakening is not a shift in sensation. It is a shift in identity. It's not about how you feel in a moment of altered consciousness. It's about what you realize and become when there's nothing altering you at all. Awakening is not the firework of one mystical night. It is the slow, steady burn of disciplined perception over time. It must be stable in silence, in suffering, in boredom, and in daily life, not only under the influence of a substance. People often confuse altered states with higher states, but they are not the same. An altered state changes your experience of the world. A higher state changes your relationship with it. Altered states are temporary. They come and go, often requiring external triggers. Higher states are transformational. They do not rely on any substance to be accessed. Instead, they are cultivated through intentional living, right practice, and deep inner clarity. The mind can be tricked into thinking that something temporary is something true. This is one of the greatest deceptions of the spiritual path. Just because something feels profound in the moment does not mean it is transformative in the long run. What matters is not just what you feel, but who you become, and if every glimpse of peace requires a puff of smoke, then it is not peace. It is a simulation. Clarity from weed is like standing on a mountain top that a helicopter flew you to. You see the view, yes, But you did not climb, you did not endure the path, learn the terrain, face the weather, so when the helicopter leaves, you are still at the bottom. This is the fundamental limitation of externally induced clarity. It gives you the vision without the journey. And without the journey, there is no transformation. There is a wisdom in glimpsing something higher. Sometimes that is enough to awaken the desire to seek it truly, but if we keep returning to the same substance for the same clarity, we stop growing. We chase the glimpse rather than cultivate the path, and in doing so we confuse the invitation with the arrival. Clarity becomes a comfort zone, not a catalyst. Spirituality is not about how high you get, it is about how deep you go. And depth requires discomfort, silence, patience, and presence. None of these come from cannabis. They must be built from within. Weed may show you what is possible, but only conscious effort will allow you to live there permanently. Person, male key point, #2 expanded. Altered states are seductive, but true spirituality is about unaltered presence. Altered states are powerful. They draw us in because they feel different from the noise of everyday life. When you smoke weed for a time, the world may appear softer, more connected, more mysterious. The edges of thought blur, time slows, and a sense of ease settles in. This seduction, the feeling of being somewhere else, of accessing something deeper, is what pulls many onto the path. But altered states are not enlightenment, they are experiences, and experiences pass. The danger lies in mistaking intensity for depth. When you're high, everything can feel more meaningful, a song, a breeze, a passing thought. But spirituality is not about intensity. It is about intimacy with the real. To be spiritual is to stay with what is, not to run from it, beautify it, or dull it. It is to meet this moment exactly as it is, without needing it to feel any particular way. Altered states often replace what is with what feels better. That is a trap. Presence means to be awake without adornment. It is the raw, unfiltered experience of life, not sweetened by substances, not softened by chemicals. It is not dramatic and often not comfortable. It is quiet, still, and simple, and it is here, always here. But the mind wants fireworks. It wants something that feels like awakening. Weed offers that illusion that you have arrived somewhere important. Yet presence doesn't need to feel important, it only needs to be real. When the mind becomes addicted to altered states, it becomes resistant to the plainness of truth. It starts to believe that insight must be accompanied by sensation. That peace must have a flavor, but real insight often arrives like a whisper, not a thunderclap. And real peace is often uneventful. Altered states, by their nature, are highs. But spiritual truth is not a high, it is equanimity. And equanimity does not excite the ego. There is also a tendency, when relying on substances, to associate spirituality with escape. But what are we escaping from? Most often ourselves. Our restlessness, our grief, our boredom, our emptiness. Weed may quiet these for a while, but it does not dissolve them. True presence means turning toward these experiences, not away from them. It means sitting in the storm without asking for shelter. That is where the real transformation begins. The path to presence is simple, but not easy. It requires attention over and over again. It requires putting down distractions, even the pleasurable ones. It demands the courage to face discomfort, without flinching, without escape. There is no shortcut here. You cannot smoke your way to stillness. You cannot inhale your way to self-realization, because the true self is not something you reach. It is something you remember. By removing everything that clouds it, weed may give you a pause from your inner chatter, but presence is not a pause. Presence is the silence that remains when the chatter is no longer needed. It does not arrive because you silenced the mind temporarily. It arrives when you understand the nature of the mind and are no longer enslaved by it. That requires observation, not intoxication. It requires knowing, not numbing. It requires staying, not soaring. If you are chasing the altered, you are missing the actual. If you are addicted to how it feels, you are not rooted in what is. And until you can sit fully awake, without enhancement, without stimulation, and simply be, you have not yet tasted what it means to be truly spiritual. Freedom is a central aim of the spiritual path, but freedom is not just external, the absence of physical chains or obligations. The deeper freedom is internal, to move through life without needing anything to feel whole, to feel balanced, to feel real. When something outside of you becomes necessary for peace or clarity, even if it feels spiritual, you are not free. You are bound gently, perhaps, but bound nonetheless. Dependence is subtle. It rarely begins with the feeling of addiction. It often begins with appreciation. You discover that weed helps you relax, helps you feel deeper, helps you meditate or contemplate. At first it's a tool, then it becomes a preference, then a pattern. Eventually it becomes a silent assumption. I can't reach that state without it. And this is how dependency masks itself as enhancement. The illusion of control is powerful. People will say, I choose to use it. I can stop any time. But when something becomes a regular condition for your practice or peace, the freedom of choice has already begun to erode. You may not realize it because weed often lacks the dramatic consequences of harder substances, but spiritually it makes little difference. Anything that stands between you and direct, unfiltered experience becomes a veil, no matter how gentle it seems. Dependence also creates a ceiling. You may reach a certain level of awareness, presence, or peace while using cannabis, but that level becomes your limit. Because you are outsourcing your inner stillness to an external aid, your inner muscles stop developing. You don't train the mind to become quiet, you quiet it with a chemical. You don't face discomfort, you dissolve it temporarily. This feels like progress, but it is stagnation wearing a peaceful mask. The spiritual path demands that we become fully awake in every moment without needing circumstances to be a certain way. That includes the condition of your own body and mind. True strength is the ability to meet your restlessness soberly, to sit with your suffering attentively, to touch stillness without assistance. If your peace comes from a substance, then the substance is the master, and you are the servant, no matter how pleasurable the relationship feels. Dependency can also distort self-perception. You may begin to confuse the chemically altered version of yourself with your higher self. The calmness, the ideas, the visions while high feel more spiritual, more insightful. But these perceptions are influenced and sometimes exaggerated. Without the discipline to return to sober awareness and question everything, you begin to chase those experiences instead of cultivating real understanding. Dependency warps the compass. There is also the danger of spiritual bypassing. When cannabis becomes the go, the response for inner discomfort, the deeper lessons remain unlearned. You avoid the pain instead of investigating it. You soothe the anxiety instead of inquiring into its roots. You float instead of diving. In doing so, the work of transformation is postponed indefinitely. The surface may look peaceful, but beneath, the patterns remain untouched and unchanged. And over time, what began as a conscious choice becomes an unconscious habit. The ritual of smoking before meditating or before reflecting becomes automatic. You no longer ask if you need it, you just assume that you do, and with that assumption, the spiritual path narrows. It becomes tied to a plant, a moment, a mood, and the vast freedom that once called to you quietly slips away, not with force, but with familiarity. Freedom is a central aim of the spiritual path, but freedom is not just external. the absence of physical chains or obligations. The deeper freedom is internal, to move through life without needing anything to feel whole, to feel balanced, to feel real. When something outside of you becomes necessary for peace or clarity, even if it feels spiritual, you are not free. You are bound gently, perhaps, but bound nonetheless. Dependence is subtle. It rarely begins with the feeling of addiction. It often begins with appreciation. You discover that weed helps you relax, helps you feel deeper, helps you meditate or contemplate. At first, it's a tool, then it becomes a preference, then a pattern. Eventually, it becomes a silent assumption. I can't reach that state without it. And this is how dependency masks itself as enhancement. The illusion of control is powerful. People will say, I choose to use it. I can stop any time. But when something becomes a regular condition for your practice or peace, the freedom of choice has already begun to erode. You may not realize it because weed often lacks the dramatic consequences of harder substances, but spiritually it makes little difference. Anything that stands between you and direct, unfiltered experience becomes a veil, no matter how gentle it seems. Dependence also creates a ceiling. You may reach a certain level of awareness, presence, or peace while using cannabis, but that level becomes your limit, because you are outsourcing your inner stillness to an external aid. Your inner muscles stop developing. You don't train the mind to become quiet. You quiet it with a chemical. You don't face discomfort. You dissolve it temporarily. This feels like progress, but it is stagnation wearing a peaceful mask. The spiritual path demands that we become fully awake in every moment without needing circumstances to be a certain way. That includes the condition of your own body and mind. True strength is the ability to meet your restlessness soberly, to sit with your suffering attentively, to touch stillness without assistance. If your peace comes from a substance, then the substance is the master, and you are the servant, no matter how pleasurable the relationship feels. Dependency can also distort self-perception. You may begin to confuse the chemically altered version of yourself with your higher self. The calmness, the ideas, the visions while high feel more spiritual, more insightful. But these perceptions are influenced and sometimes exaggerated. Without the discipline to return to sober awareness and question everything, you begin to chase those experiences instead of cultivating real understanding. Dependency warps the compass. There is also the danger of spiritual bypassing. When cannabis becomes the go-to response for inner discomfort, the deeper lessons remain unlearned. You avoid the pain instead of investigating it. You soothe the anxiety instead of inquiring into its roots. You float instead of diving. In doing so, the work of transformation is postponed indefinitely. The surface may look peaceful, but beneath, the patterns remain untouched and unchanged. And over time, what began as a conscious choice becomes an unconscious habit. The ritual of smoking before meditating or before reflecting becomes automatic. You no longer ask if you need it, you just assume that you do. And with that assumption, the spiritual path narrows. It becomes tied to a plant, a moment, a mood, and the vast freedom that once called to you quietly slips away, not with force, but with familiarity. Freedom is a central aim of the spiritual path, but freedom is not just external, the absence of physical chains or obligations. The deeper freedom is internal, to move through life without needing anything to feel whole, to feel balanced, to feel real. When something outside of you becomes necessary for peace or clarity, even if it feels spiritual, you are not free. You are bound gently, perhaps, but bound nonetheless. Dependence is subtle. It rarely begins with the feeling of addiction. It often begins with appreciation. You discover that weed helps you relax, helps you feel deeper, helps you meditate or contemplate. At first, It's a tool, then it becomes a preference, then a pattern. Eventually, it becomes a silent assumption. I can't reach that state without it. And this is how dependency masks itself as enhancement. The illusion of control is powerful. People will say, I choose to use it. I can stop any time. But when something becomes a regular condition for your practice or peace, the freedom of choice has already begun to erode. You may not realize it because weed often lacks the dramatic consequences of harder substances, but spiritually it makes little difference. Anything that stands between you and direct, unfiltered experience becomes a veil, no matter how gentle it seems. Dependence also creates a ceiling. You may reach a certain level of awareness, presence, or peace while using cannabis, but that level becomes your limit because you are outsourcing your inner stillness to an external aid. Your inner muscles stop developing. You don't train the mind to become quiet, you quiet it with a chemical. You don't face discomfort, you dissolve it temporarily. This feels like progress, but it is stagnation wearing a peaceful mask. The spiritual path demands that we become fully awake in every moment, without needing circumstances to be a certain way. That includes the condition of your own body and mind. True strength is the ability to meet your restlessness soberly, to sit with your suffering attentively, to touch stillness without assistance. If your peace comes from a substance, then the substance is the master, and you are the servant, no matter how pleasurable the relationship feels. Dependency can also distort self-perception. You may begin to confuse the chemically altered version of yourself with your higher self. The calmness, the ideas, the visions while high feel more spiritual, more insightful. But these perceptions are influenced and sometimes exaggerated. Without the discipline to return to sober awareness and question everything, you begin to chase those experiences instead of cultivating real understanding. Dependency warps the compass. There is also the danger of spiritual bypassing. When cannabis becomes the go, the response for inner discomfort, the deeper lessons remain unlearned. You avoid the pain instead of investigating it. You soothe the anxiety instead of inquiring into its roots. You float instead of diving. In doing so, the work of transformation is postponed indefinitely. The surface may look peaceful, but beneath, the patterns remain untouched and unchanged. And over time, what began as a conscious choice becomes an unconscious habit. The ritual of smoking before meditating or before reflecting becomes automatic. You no longer ask if you need it, you just assume that you do, and with that assumption, the spiritual path narrows. It becomes tied to a plant, a moment, a mood, and the vast freedom that once called to you quietly slips away, not with force, but with familiarity. Insight, in its purest form, is not something you have, it is something you live. Many people experience moments of clarity under the influence of cannabis. They feel connected, reflective, even wise. Ideas appear vivid, emotions feel authentic, patterns seem obvious. But an insight that fades when the substance wears off is not yet wisdom. It is a glimpse, a momentary light. And unless that light becomes a flame through discipline, it will always be something remembered rather than something embodied. Discipline is what turns insight into transformation. Without discipline, even the most powerful realization becomes like a dream, intense when felt, but quickly forgotten in the light of day. Discipline means you return to the practice even when it's dry, even when it's boring, even when it yields nothing. It's this returning again and again that begins to carve the mind into a vessel for real change. Cannabis may offer a spark, but discipline is what builds the fire. The mind resists discipline because it promises nothing in the short term. Substances offer immediate effect. The body relaxes, the mind shifts, the experience begins. But the spiritual path is not interested in effects. It is interested in freedom. And freedom comes from consistency, not from altered conditions. The question is not what you can feel once. The question is, what can you sustain without effort? What truth can you live every day, even when no one is watching and nothing feels mystical? Discipline also trains humility. When you rely only on substances for insight, you may begin to believe that you've reached a higher place than others. The experiences feel deep, and the ego is quick to interpret them as signs of spiritual progress. But discipline humbles you because it reminds you that awakening is not measured by what you feel, but by how you act, how you respond, how you show up when life tests you. There is no shortcut to this kind of development. Spirituality is not built in moments. It is built in routines. Daily sitting, conscious breathing, intentional movement, honest reflection. These are not dramatic. They do not always feel powerful, but they build something far more stable than any substance can offer. They build inner resilience. With discipline, peace becomes something you create, not something you wait to experience. Clarity becomes a trait, not a temporary condition. Awareness becomes a habit, not a high. A person who touches insight through weed must ask, can I reach this same space without it? If the answer is no, then the insight is not yet integrated. The true test of spiritual growth is whether it becomes portable. Can you take your clarity into your job, your arguments, your boredom, your grief? Substances often create contrast. They feel spiritual because everything else feels disconnected. But discipline closes that gap until there is no difference between spiritual and ordinary. Discipline is not about deprivation, it is about refinement. You are not punishing yourself by avoiding substances. You are purifying your ability to perceive. You are training yourself to access subtle levels of truth without stimulation. Just like an athlete trains to perform under pressure without relying on performance, enhancing drugs, the spiritual seeker trains to remain awake without external support. Because the highest truths are not loud, they require sensitivity, not stimulation. Insight through substance is like finding a treasure with borrowed tools. The moment you lose the tools, the treasure is inaccessible. But when you build your own tools through daily effort, mindfulness, ethical living, and inner observation, you can return to the treasure any time. It becomes yours not because you found it once, but because you learned the way there with your own 2 feet. There are moments when cannabis reveals something powerful, a sudden awareness of how thoughts arise, a feeling of deep interconnection with others, a perception of time as fluid, or the sense that everything is unfolding with perfect precision. These moments can feel like revelations, and in a sense they are. They show what the mind is capable of perceiving when filters are removed. But seeing the door is not the same as stepping into the room. Insight granted by a substance is like light from a match. It shows you what's there, but it doesn't last. It gives a glimpse, not a journey. The door opens for a few minutes, perhaps a few hours, but the question is, can you walk through it when the substance fades? Can you return to that awareness without needing the match again? Practice is what allows you to do this. Practice builds the strength, balance, and patience to remain in that expanded space without external help. The opening that weed offers is not false. It is real but incomplete. It reveals the possibility of deeper awareness. For some, this is the first time they realize there is more to consciousness than ordinary perception. That is a gift, but the danger is stopping there, becoming satisfied with the preview without pursuing the full experience. Practice is the vehicle. Without it, you remain at the threshold, always looking in, never living what you've seen. Real transformation happens when the body and mind are trained, when awareness becomes a baseline, not an event. When equanimity is present in daily struggle, not just during mystical highs, this level of presence cannot be sustained through chemical means. It must be built breath by breath, step by step. Only consistent spiritual practice, meditation, breathwork, ethical living, mindful movement, turns glimpses into a way of being. Cannabis can show you what silence feels like. Practice teaches you how to live from that silence. The plant may show you what it's like to feel spacious, open, unburdened. But practice is how you clean out the clutter inside so that spaciousness becomes your natural state. The one is a temporary lifting of the veil, the other is the gradual removal of it, until nothing separates you from presence anymore. Many seekers chase the feeling they had during a weed-induced experience. They try to replicate it. But that state is not meant to be repeated through the same means. It is meant to be pursued with your own effort. That one experience was an invitation, not a destination. It is as if the universe whispered, "Look, this is possible. The rest is up to you." Whether or not you accept that invitation, whether or not you build the path, is what makes the difference. There is also a deep integrity that comes from walking through the door yourself. No one carried you. No substance transported you. You learned, you struggled, you fell and returned, and in doing so, you didn't just reach a state, you became it. The door that weed opens becomes part of you when you walk through it with full consciousness. This is what spiritual maturity looks like, not chasing states, but becoming the kind of person who naturally embodies those states. Weed may act as a messenger, but it cannot do the work. It may say, "There's more to see," but it cannot teach you how to see clearly without it. Only practice can do that. Only the path can turn fleeting insight into stable awareness. And only the seeker can walk that path with honesty, with patience, and with the understanding that what is easy rarely leads to what is lasting. Experiences can be powerful. They can shake you awake, break down your mental walls, and make you question everything. Under the influence of weed, you might feel as though you've seen beyond the veil, understood your trauma, your patterns, or even the nature of the universe itself. But spiritual evolution is not just about what you experience. It is about what you can carry with you into ordinary life. Without integration, even the most profound experience becomes just a memory. Integration means that what you saw becomes how you live. It's the process of taking a flash of insight and allowing it to change your choices, your relationships, your reactions, and your habits. And this process requires a clear mind, not a high mind, not a chemically altered state. Because true integration demands confrontation. It demands staying present with your pain, your confusion, your past, and making conscious adjustments. This is deep work, and it can't be outsourced to any substance. Many people mistake repeated experience for progress. They think, if I just have this insight again, I'll finally change. So they keep returning to weed or similar tools, hoping that the next time will finally solidify what the last time revealed. But the work doesn't happen during the high, the work happens after. When the glow fades, when life returns to its full complexity, and when your nervous system is tested, that's when the real growth begins. And that growth only sticks if you're present for it, unaltered. When you're sober, every emotion is raw. Every reaction is honest. Every challenge is uncloaked. This is the ideal ground for integration because nothing is filtered. You feel everything, and feeling everything is necessary if you want to change at the root. Weed may offer the insight, but only a clear, unguarded nervous system can embody that insight. If you numb or soften your edges every time difficulty arises, you'll never know your real limits, and you'll never break through them. There is also a danger of confusing the memory of an experience with its wisdom. Under cannabis, you may understand something about yourself that feels life-changing. But unless that understanding becomes part of your actions, how you speak, how you relate, how you choose, it remains theory. Integration asks, what are you doing with what you saw? And more importantly, can you do it now when you are completely sober and feeling everything fully? Spiritual growth demands consistency. The person who integrates makes small daily shifts based on what they have realized. They don't just chase highs, they build foundations. They choose silence when it's hard. They apologize when the ego resists. They act with compassion even when it's inconvenient. And all of this must happen without the glow of a substance, because it's only in real conditions, messy, loud, frustrating, that true spiritual integration is tested. It is in the sober state that your nervous system learns. It is here that you create new neural pathways. You learn how to breathe through discomfort instead of escaping it. You develop the strength to stay in presence without needing to modify it. You rewire the body to respond with awareness, not reactivity. None of this happens in an altered state. It happens in the raw, quiet hours after, when the practice becomes your own. If you're always seeking experiences, you may accumulate insight but remain unchanged. If you're devoted to integration, even one moment of truth is enough to shape the rest of your life. But that shaping can only happen when you are fully here, fully conscious, and fully willing to work with what is, without softeners, without shortcuts, without illusions. There's a quiet misunderstanding in many spiritual circles that clarity can be enhanced by altered states. That if the mind is shifted, softened, or expanded chemically, then the truth will shine more brightly. But clarity is not what arises in altered perception. Clarity is what remains when distortion is removed. It's not an addition, it's a subtraction. It is what's left when confusion dissolves, illusion falls away, and the mind no longer interferes with what simply is. Weed may give the sensation of depth, the thoughts seem profound, the emotions feel textured, the world appears more layered or significant. But this is not the same as clarity. These are effects of alteration. Clarity is clean, it has no weight. It doesn't rely on stimulation or the chemistry of calm. It comes from inner stillness that is earned, not induced. It arises naturally when the dust settles, not when fog is repainted as misty insight. A fog can feel mystical. It can soften the edges of the world, create beauty where there was boredom, and turn ordinary thoughts into poetic revelations. But fog is still fog. It may look like depth, but it is density, and the spiritual path is not about densifying experience. It is about distilling it. It is about simplicity. The simpler you become, the clearer you see. The quieter your system, the more truth reveals itself, not as a vision, but as a quiet certainty. Clarity doesn't speak loudly, it does not dazzle, it does not intoxicate, it doesn't flood the senses or whisper cosmic metaphors in your ear. It's not performative, it is gentle, precise, and often surprising in its plainness. And because it is so quiet, it requires a quiet inner space to meet it. If the mind is stirred, even pleasantly stirred clarity recedes. It waits patiently for the moment you stop reaching, stop altering, stop chasing. When weed enters the system, it brings with it a lens. That lens may feel spiritual. It may allow new angles, new perspectives. But it is still a lens, and clarity has no lens. It is the removal of all filtering, all interpretation. It is unmediated awareness, just as a lake reveals its true reflection only when undisturbed. So too does the mind reflect truth only when it is still, sober, and free from influence. True clarity is often uncomfortable at first. It shows you what you have been avoiding. It reveals your illusions, your defenses, your ego in disguise. Altered states may bypass this discomfort, replacing it with fascination, but clarity requires the strength to face what is, not what feels inspiring. It calls for the courage to see without interpretation, to stop translating life and simply perceive it, raw and unfiltered. Clarity also sharpens discernment. You begin to see the difference between intuition and impulse, between truth and preference, between surrender and escapism. This discernment is the backbone of any real spiritual path. It cannot develop in fog, no matter how beautiful the fog feels. Discernment needs precision, and precision needs sobriety. It is here, in the sharp light of undistorted awareness, that your real choices begin. You don't cultivate clarity by chasing more experience. You cultivate it by subtracting what clouds it. Fear, projection, chemicals, habitual reactions, even the desire to feel spiritual, all of it must be seen, softened, and ultimately dropped. And then, in the stillness that remains, clarity arises, not because it was created, but because everything else was removed. Awakening is not a feeling. It is a shift in how you relate to life, and central to this shift is the acceptance of responsibility. Responsibility for your inner state, for your reactions, for your intentions, for your growth. Weed, for many, begins as a tool, a catalyst, a doorway to introspection, but over time it can become a crutch, something leaned on to feel grounded, to feel deep, to feel spiritual. Dependency begins where responsibility ends. When you depend on something outside yourself to feel connected, you give away your power. You externalize your inner work, and in doing so, you begin to weaken the very muscles you're meant to strengthen: presence, resilience, and clarity. The path of awakening is not about always feeling good or spiritual. It's about meeting yourself completely, especially when you don't. And that meeting must happen without leaning on fog to soften the discomfort. True responsibility means you do the work, whether or not it feels profound. You sit in silence even when it's dry. You reflect even when your mind resists. You breathe even when nothing magical happens. This discipline is quiet but powerful. It teaches you that spiritual growth is not something that comes from ideal conditions. It is forged in real life, where nothing is controlled and every moment is an invitation to wake up. Dependency subtly erodes your sovereignty. At first, it feels harmless, a ritual, a helper, but soon your nervous system forgets how to access peace without it. Your heart forgets how to open on its own. You begin to feel that the tool is the source, when in truth the source is within you. And the longer you rely on a substance to reveal it, the more distant it becomes from your sober experience. Responsibility calls you back. It says, stop outsourcing your light. On the awakened path, there is no one to blame. Not the world, not your past, not your mood, and not your substance use. Everything becomes a mirror, reflecting your inner state. This level of ownership is difficult, but it's also liberating, because it means you are never powerless. You are not waiting for a plant, a mood, or a breakthrough to feel whole. You train yourself to remain aware, connected, and present, on your own, in your own body, through your own effort. Responsibility also asks, can you meet your suffering without escape? Can you meet your joy without exaggeration? Can you meet your boredom without stimulation? This is the essence of awakening, not becoming more mystical, but becoming more real. And reality is not always glowing. Sometimes it's raw, uncertain, plain. But when you meet it fully without filters, it begins to reveal a peace that doesn't need to be enhanced or manufactured. Dependency offers a shortcut, but awakening requires the long way. And the long way is not worse, it's more honest. Every step is yours. Every insight is earned. You do not rely on something to feel spiritual. You become spiritual in how you live, how you love, how you serve. You no longer reach for tools out of habit. You use them, if at all, with deep discernment and full awareness. They serve you, but you do not serve them. Responsibility is not rigid. It is not cold. It is spacious. It is warm, it says. Everything you seek is already inside. But to uncover it, you must stop reaching out and begin turning inward. You must stop leaning and start standing, not because standing is easy, but because it is real. It is how truth becomes lived, not through altered experience, but through sober presence moment after moment, breath after breath, choice after choice. So if you've come to this talk looking for the last video you'll ever need about weed and spirituality, let it be not because it gave you answers, but because it gave you back your responsibility. Let it remind you that your consciousness is not something to be borrowed, altered, or borrowed again. It is something to be reclaimed. Weed may show you what's possible. It may give you glimpses, openings, even deep experiences. But the truth is this: you do not awaken by what you experience, you awaken by how you live. You do not need to feel high to access depth. You do not need to be altered to become aware. The most spiritual state you will ever touch is the one you can return to in complete sobriety, with no incense, no plant, no stimulation, just breathe, stillness, and presence. And so the invitation is simple. Stop chasing the doorway. Become the one who walks through. Let the smoke clear. Let the mind settle. Let your practice begin where the fog ends. Because the real high, the lasting high, the one no substance can give or take away, is the peace that arises when nothing is in the way anymore. That is where this path points, and now the next step is yours.